Colorado Territory, 1871. The mountains stood sentinel over the sprawling Thompson Ranch, where the last of summer's wildflowers dotted the meadows like scattered gold. For 23-year-old Pearl Hayes, those flowers were the only gold her family had ever found in this unforgiving land. She sat on the front porch of the only home she'd ever known, her honey-blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun, her blue calico dress faded from too many washings. Pearl had learned long ago that the frontier had no room for dreamers. Dreams were luxuries reserved for the wealthy back east, not for the daughter of a failed rancher. Survival was all that mattered here, and she'd buried her hopes for anything more alongside her mother 6 years ago. Love was a distraction she couldn't afford, not when each season brought new threats, drought, blizzards, rustlers. Her father had taught her that lesson well. Depend on no one but yourself, Pearl. Men will always disappoint you in the end. She believed it completely. Even now, as she watched her father load the last of their belongings into a wagon bound for California, she felt only a hollow resignation. The ranch was sold. 20 years of Hayes' family blood and sweat, traded for enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere Pearl refused to go. "You're making a mistake," her father said, checking the harness on his team. "There's nothing for you here anymore." Pearl squared her shoulders. "I'm 23, father. Old enough to decide my own future. And what future is that? Alone in a territory that breaks even the strongest men." She had no answer that would satisfy him. How could she explain that this land, harsh as it was woven into her very being? That leaving would be like cutting out a piece of herself? The sound of hoofbeats drew their attention to the road. A lone rider approached, his silhouette familiar against the setting sun. Jesse Townsend, foreman of the neighboring Triple T Ranch. At 26, Jesse had already earned a reputation as one of the finest horsemen in the county. His family's ranch had prospered while the Hayes place faltered. Jesse dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Unlike many cowboys, he kept himself neat, clean-shaven except for a slight stubble that seemed to appear by day's end, no matter how recently he'd taken a razor to his face. His dark brown hair curled slightly at his collar, and his eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, found Pearl's immediately. "Mr. Hayes." He nodded respectfully to Pearl's father before turning to her. "Miss Hayes." Pearl nodded stiffly. "Mr. Townsend." Jesse's presence unsettled her. They'd grown up as neighbors, attended the same small schoolhouse, shared the same community gatherings. But in recent years, she'd kept her distance. His kindness threatened the walls she'd built around herself, and she couldn't afford weakness. "I heard you were leaving," Jesse said to Mr. Hayes. "Thought I might offer help with any last-minute arrangements." "Kind of you," Mr. Hayes replied. "But we're just about done. California awaits." "We?" Jesse's eyes flicked to Pearl. "My father is going to California," Pearl clarified. "I'm staying." Jesse's expression shifted, concern replacing politeness. "Alone? But the ranch is sold." "I've taken a position with Mrs. Abernathy at the general store," Pearl explained, her tone defensive. "I'll have lodging above the shop." Her father sighed heavily. "I've tried to reason with her. Perhaps you'll have better luck, Jesse. Tell her a young woman has no business remaining alone in these parts." Jesse studied Pearl's face, seeing the determination etched there. "I believe Miss Hayes knows her own mind, sir." Mr. Hayes shook his head, checking his pocket watch. "Well, I need to make fair play by nightfall." He turned to Pearl, his expression softening momentarily. "The offer stands. You can join me anytime." Pearl nodded, knowing she never would. Her father climbed onto the wagon seat, took up the reins, and with a last nod to Jesse, set the team in motion. Pearl watched silently as the wagon grew smaller in the distance, carrying away the last of her family. "You really intend to stay?" Jesse asked quietly. "I do." Pearl turned toward the house, no longer hers, fighting back unexpected tears. "This land may not love us back, Mr. Townsend, but it's the only home I've known." Jesse took a step closer. "Pearl, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said years ago." The earnestness in his voice made Pearl turn. For a moment, the setting sun caught his face, illuminating features she'd known since childhood, but somehow never truly seen. "Your father didn't just sell the ranch," Jesse said. "He sold it to me." Pearl felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "To you? But how? Why would you not say anything until now? I wanted to tell you sooner, Jesse admitted, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from their childhood when he was gathering courage. But your father insisted on handling it his way. Said he needed to offer you California first, give you the choice to leave. So this was all what? Some arrangement between the two of you? No, Pearl. I bought this ranch because it was the right thing to do. Because I couldn't bear to see strangers living here, changing everything your family built. Jesse hesitated. And because I knew you belonged here. Pearl took a step back, her mind racing. You had no right to make such assumptions about me. Perhaps not, Jesse acknowledged. But I know you love this land as much as I do. I've watched you ride these pastures since we were children, seen how you fought alongside your father through every hardship. The truth of his words only fueled Pearl's indignation. So now I'm to be grateful? Thank you kindly for purchasing my home, Mr. Townsend. Shall I curtsy before I pack my things for Mrs. Abernathy's? Jesse's expression fell. That's not what I meant at all. Pearl, I didn't buy this ranch to force you out. I bought it to offer you a choice. What choice? She demanded. Stay, he said simply. Stay here, in your home. Run the ranch alongside me. Or separately, if that's what you prefer. We could divide the property, give you the southern pastures. Or, he trailed off. Or what? Jesse met her gaze directly. Or we could join our lives as well as our lands. Pearl's breath caught. Mr. Townsend, Jesse, he corrected gently. We've known each other too long for such formality. Jesse, she conceded. If you're suggesting what I think you are, I'm suggesting nothing improper, he assured her. But I won't pretend my feelings for you are merely neighborly. They never have been. The admission hung in the air between them, reshaping everything Pearl thought she knew about their shared history. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders caught their attention. 3 men on horseback were coming fast down the road from town. Jesse's expression darkened. Those are Harlan Finch's men. Pearl's stomach knotted. Finch was a cattle baron who'd been buying up struggling ranches throughout the territory, using methods that ranged from aggressive to outright illegal. Her father had rebuffed his offers repeatedly. What do they want? The sale is complete. That's what I intend to find out, Jesse said, stepping protectively in front of Pearl as the riders pulled up. The leader, a weasel-faced man named Curtis, smiled unpleasantly. Well now, if it isn't young Townsend. Heard you've been expanding your operation. My business is my own, Curtis, Jesse replied evenly. Normally, I'd agree. But Mr. Finch takes issue with the sale. He had an understanding with Mr. Hayes. Pearl stepped forward. My father would never deal with Finch. Curtis's eyes slid to Pearl, his gaze traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. No offense, Miss Hayes, but your daddy was desperate enough to consider all offers. Mr. Finch has documentation proving a verbal agreement. That's impossible, Pearl insisted. Documentation can be forged, Jesse added. And verbal agreements don't supersede a signed deed. The Hayes Ranch is legally mine now. Curtis spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Mr. Finch disagrees. He's prepared to contest the sale in court. Meanwhile, he suggests you reconsider your position. Ranching's a dangerous business. Accidents happen. The threat wasn't subtle. Jesse's hand moved closer to the pistol at his hip. You've delivered your message. Now ride on. The men exchanged glances but made no move to leave. I believe Mr. Townsend asked you to go, Pearl said, her voice steadier than she felt. Curtis chuckled. The lady's got spirit. Shame about your circumstances, Miss Hayes. If you need employment after this property dispute is settled, Mr. Finch could always use a pretty face at his establishment in town. Jesse stepped forward, his expression dangerous. That's enough. Get off this property now, or I'll remove you myself. The tension stretched taut until Curtis finally reined his horse around. This isn't over, Townsend. With a nod to his companions, they galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. When they were out of sight, Pearl released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Will they come back? Eventually, Jesse said grimly. Finch doesn't give up easily. Why would he want our ranch so badly? It's been struggling for years. Jesse turned to her. Because of the water rights. Your father secured them for the entire northern valley. Whoever controls this land controls access to the river for miles. Finch has been trying to monopolize water throughout the territory. Pearl felt dizzy with the realization. And now you control those rights. We do, Jesse corrected. If you stay. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows across the land that had defined Pearl's existence. In the space of an hour, everything had changed. Her father gone, her home sold, threats made, and Jesse Townsend standing before her offering. What exactly? I need time, she said finally. This is all too sudden. Jesse nodded. Of course. But Pearl, you shouldn't stay here alone tonight. Not with Finch's men lurking about. Come to my ranch, just until we sort things out. My housekeeper will ensure everything is proper. The old Pearl would have refused outright, determined to prove she needed no one's protection. But something had shifted in her worldview, like the first crack in a dam. All right, she agreed. Just for tonight. As they rode together toward the Triple T Ranch, Pearl couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. Trust no one, depend on yourself alone. And yet, as Jesse rode beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, she felt the first stirring of something she'd denied herself for too long: hope. The Triple T Ranch stood in stark contrast to the struggling Hayes property. Well-maintained fences enclosed lush pastures, sturdy outbuildings flanked a two-story main house, and gas lamps illuminated the yard as they approached in the gathering dusk. Your family has done well, Pearl observed, unable to keep a hint of envy from her voice. We've been fortunate, Jesse agreed. But it wasn't always this way. My father nearly lost everything during the drought of '59. Your father helped him through that time. Pearl looked at him in surprise. My father never mentioned that. Samuel Hayes was a proud man, but he was also generous when it mattered. He loaned us cattle to rebuild our herd. Without him, there might not be a Triple T today. Jesse dismounted and came around to help Pearl down. That's partly why I couldn't let your ranch go to strangers. The revelation about her father's past kindness stood at odds with the bitter, closed-off man who'd just departed for California. Pearl wondered what other truths she might have missed while focused solely on survival. Jesse's housekeeper, Mrs. Donnelly, a cheerful widow with gray-streaked hair, welcomed them warmly. Miss Hayes, what a pleasure to see you again. It's been too long since you visited. Pearl managed a small smile, remembering childhood visits when both ranches had celebrated holidays together, before her mother's death had changed everything. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Donnelly. Nonsense, dear. Any friend of Jesse's is welcome here. I've prepared the blue room for you. It has a lovely view of the mountains. After a simple but hearty supper, during which Jesse outlined his concerns about Finch and his possible next moves, Mrs. Donnelly showed Pearl to her room. The accommodations were comfortable, with handmade quilts and curtains that spoke of a woman's touch, something the Hayes Ranch had lacked since her mother passed. Pearl stood by the window, gazing out at moonlit pastures, when a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Jesse, respectfully remaining in the hallway. I wanted to be sure you had everything you need, he said. Yes, thank you. Mrs. Donnelly has been very kind. Jesse nodded. Pearl, about what I said earlier, about joining our lives and lands. I want you to know I wasn't making a rash decision. She studied his face in the lamplight. Then what were you doing? Voicing something I've felt since we were 17, he admitted. Do you remember the spring festival that year? When lightning struck the gathering tree. Pearl did remember. A sudden storm had turned a community celebration dangerous. You pulled Timothy Walker's little sister from under that falling branch. Jesse's eyes never left hers. And you were the only one who ran toward the danger instead of away from it. You helped me get her free. That's when I knew. Knew what? Pearl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That you were the strongest, bravest woman I'd ever know. That I wanted to build a life with someone like you. He hesitated. With you. Pearl felt warmth spread through her chest, even as caution held her back. Jesse, you don't need to respond now, he said quickly. I understand this is sudden, despite how long I've carried these feelings. Just know that whether you choose to partner with me in business, in life, or simply as a neighbor, I will ensure you never lose your connection to your family's land. The sincerity in his voice threatened to breach the walls Pearl had built around her heart. Why didn't you ever say anything before? Your father made it clear you weren't interested in suitors, Jesse replied. And after your mother died, you seemed to withdraw from everyone, including me. I respected your grief, your boundaries. Perhaps I respected them too much. Pearl remembered how she deliberately distanced herself, believing connections only led to pain. Had she been wrong all this time? Get some rest, Jesse said gently. Tomorrow, we'll ride back to your ranch, and you can take as much time as you need to decide your path forward." After he left, Pearl sat on the edge of the bed, her world tilting on its axis. For years, she believed the frontier left no room for anything but survival. Yet here was Jesse Townsend, offering her a vision of something more: partnership, protection, perhaps even love. But could she trust it? Could she trust him? Her father's warnings still echoed. Men will always disappoint you in the end. As she drifted toward sleep, Pearl couldn't help but wonder if her father had been projecting his own failures onto an entire gender. And if so, what other beliefs had she inherited that might not be true? Dawn broke clear and cool over the mountains. Pearl awoke to the unfamiliar comfort of the Triple T guest room, momentarily disoriented before the previous day's events came rushing back. Her father gone, her home sold to Jesse, and Finch's men making threats. She dressed quickly in the same blue calico, wishing she'd brought a change of clothes. When she descended the stairs, she found Jesse in conversation with an older man she recognized as Sheriff Taylor from town. "Miss Hayes," the sheriff greeted her, tipping his hat. "Sorry to hear about your troubles." "What brings you here, Sheriff?" Pearl asked, glancing between the two men. Jesse's expression was grim. "There was a fire at your ranch last night. The sheriff rode out first light to inform us." Pearl's heart stuttered. "How bad?" "The main house is still standing," Sheriff Taylor assured her. "But the barn's gone. Burned to the ground." "Finch," Jesse said darkly. The sheriff nodded. "Likely so, though proving it will be difficult. His men were drinking at the saloon all evening, establishing their alibi. They could have hired others to do the dirty work." Pearl sank into a chair, the reality of Harlan Finch's threats sinking in. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "I'm afraid so," the sheriff confirmed. "Finch has been consolidating power in this county for years. He's not used to being denied." "We won't be intimidated," Jesse declared, his jaw set with determination. Sheriff Taylor gave him a measuring look. "Admire your spirit, son, but be careful. Finch doesn't fight fair, and he's got men on his payroll who'll do things he can keep his hands clean of." After the sheriff departed, Jesse turned to Pearl. "We should ride out and assess the damage." Pearl nodded, still processing the violation of her home. They ate a quick breakfast before setting out, the morning air crisp against their faces as they rode. "I'm sorry, Pearl," Jesse said as they crested the hill overlooking her ranch. "I never meant to bring this trouble to your doorstep." "You didn't," she replied. "It seems Finch had designs on our water rights all along. If anything, I should thank you for standing between him and what my family built." The scene that greeted them at the ranch was stark. Where the barn had stood was now a blackened skeleton, wisps of smoke still rising from the ruins. The farmhouse remained untouched, but the message was clear: next time, they might not be so lucky. Pearl dismounted and walked slowly through the destruction. Miraculously, the small family cemetery where her mother was buried, set on a gentle rise behind the house, had been spared. She stood there for a long moment, drawing strength from the connection to her past. Jesse joined her, respectfully removing his hat. "We'll rebuild," he promised. "Better than before." "We?" Pearl questioned, turning to face him. "I meant what I said yesterday," Jesse affirmed. "This is your home, Pearl. I bought it to preserve what your family created, not to take it from you." Pearl studied him, seeing not just the man he'd become, but glimpses of the boy she'd known. The one who'd always treated her as an equal, who'd shared books from his family's library, who'd never once suggested she couldn't do something because she was a girl. "Why did we drift apart, Jesse?" she asked suddenly. The question seemed to catch him off guard. "After your mother died, you changed. Built walls around yourself. I tried to reach you, but I pushed everyone away," Pearl finished for him. "I convinced myself it was safer that way." "Was it?" "No," she admitted. "Just lonelier." A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out over the land they both loved. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of human conflicts over their territory. "I need to gather my things from the house," Pearl said finally. "If Finch's men return, I don't want to lose everything." They spent the morning packing Pearl's belongings, her mother's china, family photographs, books, and clothing. The work gave her a strange sense of closure, as though she were finally acknowledging the end of one chapter of her life. As they loaded the last trunk onto Jesse's wagon, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Pearl's heart sank when she recognized Curtis leading a group of 5 men, all wearing Finch's brand on their vests. "Seems we have company," Jesse muttered, positioning himself between Pearl and the approaching riders. Curtis pulled his horse up short, his smile wolfish as he surveyed the burned barn. "Shame about your accident, Townsend. Ranching's a risky business." "Cut the act, Curtis," Jesse replied coldly. "We all know Finch was behind this." "Careful with those accusations. Mr. Finch is a respected businessman." "What do you want?" Pearl demanded, stepping up beside Jesse despite his protective stance. Curtis's eyes narrowed at her defiance. "Mr. Finch is still interested in acquiring this property. He's prepared to make a generous offer, more than Townsend paid, I'm sure." "The ranch isn't for sale," Jesse stated firmly. "Pity." Curtis glanced at his men, who had spread out in a semicircle. "Mr. Finch thought you might be more reasonable after last night's demonstration." Pearl felt a chill run through her as she realized the men were positioning themselves strategically. This wasn't just intimidation, they were preparing for violence. "You tell Finch that if he wants this land, he'll have to come through me," Jesse declared, his hand moving toward his holster. Curtis chuckled. "That's precisely what we had in mind." The tension was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. All eyes turned to see a group of riders approaching fast, ranch hands from the Triple T, led by Jesse's foreman, a grizzled veteran named Hank. Curtis assessed the changing odds and scowled. "This isn't over, Townsend. Not by a long shot." He jerked his chin at his men, and they wheeled their horses around, departing as quickly as they'd come. When Hank and the others arrived, Jesse explained the situation. "Mrs. Donnelly was worried when you didn't return for noon dinner," Hank explained. "Said with Finch making threats, we ought to check on you." "Good timing," Jesse acknowledged. "I think they were planning more than just threats today." Pearl realized she was shaking, the danger they'd just faced hitting her all at once. Jesse noticed immediately, moving to her side. "Are you all right?" She nodded, steadying herself. "I will be. But I think it's clear I can't stay here alone, not with Finch escalating like this." "You'll come back to the Triple T," Jesse said, making it more statement than question. Pearl hesitated, knowing such an arrangement would fuel gossip, even with Mrs. Donnelly's presence as chaperone. But the alternative, remaining vulnerable to Finch's men, was unthinkable. "Yes," she agreed. "But Jesse, we need a more permanent solution. Finch won't stop, and I can't live as your guest indefinitely." Jesse's eyes held hers, understanding the implications of what she was saying. "What do you propose?" Pearl took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood on the edge of a precipice. "I propose we consider joining our lands officially, as you suggested. A business arrangement," she clarified quickly, "for mutual protection and benefit." If Jesse was disappointed by her emphasis on business, he hit it well. "I agree. We're stronger together than apart." As they finished loading Pearl's belongings and prepared to leave, she cast one last look at the Hayes Ranch, her past. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but for the first time in years, she wasn't facing it alone. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Pearl's life. She moved into the Triple T's guest quarters, helping Mrs. Donnelly with household management while learning the operations of Jesse's considerably larger ranch. To her surprise, Jesse treated her as a full partner in decision-making, seeking her input on everything from cattle sales to pasture rotation. "You've managed a ranch most of your life?" he explained when she questioned this. "Why wouldn't I value your experience?" His respect strengthened their working relationship, but it also began to erode Pearl's long-held belief that depending on others, on men in particular, was a weakness. Jesse wasn't her father, whose dreams had always outpaced his abilities. He was methodical, practical, building the Triple T through careful planning rather than grand schemes. Meanwhile, the threat from Finch loomed constantly. Jesse posted men to guard both properties and sent riders to check the Hayes Ranch daily. The burned barn remained a stark reminder of what they faced. One evening, as Pearl sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jesse joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "I was thinking about my father," she admitted. "Wondering if he's found what he was looking for in California. Do you regret not going with him?" Pearl considered this. "No, I belong here. I think I always have." She turned to Jesse. "Has there been any word about Finch's next move?" Sheriff Taylor heard rumors he's filing legal challenges to the water rights. claiming your father promised them to him before selling to me. That's absurd. My father would never, I know, Jesse assured her. But Finch has judges in his pocket. We need to be prepared for a legal battle. Pearl sighed, frustrated by the constant threat hanging over them. There must be something more we can do. Jesse was quiet for a moment. There is one option we haven't discussed. A way to strengthen our position legally. What's that? His eyes met hers, serious and intent. Marriage. Pearl nearly dropped her coffee cup. Marriage. Hear me out, Jesse continued. As business partners, our arrangement could be challenged. Finch could claim I'm simply using you to legitimize my claim to the Hayes water rights. But as husband and wife, our legal standing would be much stronger. The courts would view it as a proper joining of assets. Pearl set her cup down, studying Jesse's face in the fading light. Is that all it would be? A legal maneuver? Jesse's expression softened. You know it wouldn't be. Not for me. The directness of his response caught her off guard. In the weeks they'd spent working together, they'd maintained a careful professional distance, despite the undeniable current between them. Jesse, you don't need to answer now, he said quickly. It's a significant decision. I just wanted you to know it's an option worth considering. Pearl nodded, grateful for the reprieve. I'll think about it. Later that night, she sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the star-filled sky. Marriage. The word both thrilled and terrified her. She'd long ago resigned herself to spinsterhood, believing love was a luxury the frontier didn't afford women like her. But Jesse wasn't proposing love, at least not explicitly. He was offering a partnership, a joining of forces against a common enemy, that she could understand, even accept. The question was whether she could enter such an arrangement without acknowledging the growing feelings she harbored for him. Pearl was still weighing these thoughts the next morning when a rider arrived from town with an urgent message. Finch had filed legal papers challenging Jesse's ownership of the Hayes Ranch, claiming prior verbal agreement. The case would be heard in 3 days' time. This is moving faster than I expected, Jesse said grimly, reading the notice. Finch must have paid handsomely to expedite the hearing. Pearl felt a cold determination settle over her. Then we need to move quickly too. I've made my decision, Jesse. I accept your proposal. Jesse looked up sharply. Pearl, I don't want you to feel forced into this. I don't, she assured him, surprised to find it was true. This is my choice. A practical one, yes, but also. She hesitated, then pressed on. Also one I find I want to make. The smile that broke across Jesse's face was like sunrise after a long night. Are you certain? Pearl nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders. I am. But we should do this properly, with witnesses and documentation that cannot be challenged. Finch won't be able to claim coercion or impropriety. Jesse agreed, and they rode into town immediately to speak with Pastor Miller and arrange the ceremony. The minister, who'd known both families for years, was surprised but pleased by their news. I always thought you two would find your way to each other, he confessed. Even when you were children, there was a bond there. Word of their engagement spread rapidly through the small community. By the time they returned to the Triple T, Mrs. Donnelly had already heard and was practically vibrating with excitement. A wedding. And here I was thinking you'd never settle down, Jesse Townsend. The following day was a flurry of preparations. While Pearl had insisted on a simple ceremony, Mrs. Donnelly was determined to make it special. She unearthed her own wedding dress from a trunk, offering it to Pearl. It's a bit old-fashioned now, the housekeeper admitted, but with some alterations. Pearl accepted gratefully, touched by the woman's kindness. The ivory satin was yellowed with age but still beautiful, and with Mrs. Donnelly's skilled needle, they adjusted it to fit Pearl's slender frame. As she prepared for bed that night, her last as Pearl Hayes, she found herself trembling with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Jesse Townsend. The thought both terrified and elated her. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reflections. She opened it to find Jesse standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I apologize for disturbing you, he said, but I wanted to give you something before tomorrow. He held out a small wooden box. Pearl took it, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a single pearl set in the center. It was my mother's, Jesse explained. She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart. Pearl looked up at him, emotion tightening her throat. Jesse, it's beautiful, but I can't. Please, he interrupted gently. I want you to have it. Not because our marriage is a strategic alliance, but because—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet conviction. "Because you have captured my heart, Pearl Hayes. You always have." The raw honesty in his voice shattered the last of Pearl's resistance. The walls she'd built around her heart crumbled completely, and she found herself speaking a truth she'd denied for too long. "I've been so afraid," she admitted. "After my mother died, I watched my father break. He loved her so much that losing her destroyed something in him. I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable." Jesse's gaze held hers, understanding. "And now I realize there's no safety in isolation. Just emptiness." Pearl took a trembling breath. "I care for you, Jesse. More than I've allowed myself to acknowledge. This marriage may have practical benefits, but that's not why I'm entering into it. Not anymore." The joy that spread across Jesse's face was answer enough. He took her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I'll see you tomorrow, Pearl Hayes, when you become my wife." As he left, Pearl closed the door and leaned against it, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Tomorrow, she would marry Jesse Townsend, not just to secure their land, but because somehow, despite all her defenses, she'd fallen in love with him. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Pearl stood before the mirror in Mrs. Donnelly's altered gown, hardly recognizing herself. The ivory satin complemented her honey-blonde hair, which Mrs. Donnelly had arranged with sprigs of wildflowers. "You look beautiful, dear," the housekeeper said, misty-eyed. "Your mother would be so proud." Pearl touched the pearl ring Jesse had given her, now adorning her left hand. "I think she would have liked Jesse." "Of course she would. What's not to like? He's hard-working, honest, and he looks at you like you hung the moon." A knock at the bedroom door announced the arrival of Sheriff Taylor, who had agreed to escort Pearl in her father's absence. "Ready, Miss Hayes?" he asked, offering his arm. Pearl took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I believe I am." The ceremony was held in the Triple T's front parlor, transformed by Mrs. Donnelly's efforts with flowers and ribbons. Though arranged hastily, nearly 20 neighbors and friends had gathered to witness the union, their presence a testament to the community's support. When Pearl entered on Sheriff Taylor's arm, her eyes immediately found Jesse, standing tall and handsome by the fireplace. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a formal suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. Pastor Miller spoke of commitment, partnership, and faith, but Pearl barely heard the words. All she could focus on was Jesse's hand holding hers, warm and steady. When it came time to speak their vows, his voice rang clear and true, promising to honor, protect, and cherish her all the days of his life. When Pearl repeated those same sacred promises, she was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The fears and doubts that had plagued her for years seemed distant now, replaced by a certainty that this path, this man, was right for her. "By the authority vested in me," Pastor Miller concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jesse's kiss was gentle yet full of promise, sealing their union before God and their community. As they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Townsend, Pearl felt a profound sense of rightness wash over her. This wasn't just a strategic alliance, it was a homecoming. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number, thanks to Mrs. Donnelly's preparations. Pearl found herself moved by the genuine goodwill of their neighbors, many offering gifts and help with rebuilding the Hayes barn. "Seems we've become the talk of the county," Jesse murmured, coming to her side with a glass of punch. "In a good way, I hope," Pearl replied. "The best way." He nodded towards several men deep in conversation with Sheriff Taylor. "Those ranchers from the South Valley are offering to stand with us against Finch. Seems we're not the only ones tired of his bullying." Pearl felt a surge of hope. "So we might actually win this." "We just might," Jesse agreed. "Especially now that our union is official. Speaking of which," he handed her a folded document. "I had this drawn up yesterday. It transfers half ownership of both properties to you. The Triple T and the Hayes Ranch will be held jointly between us." Pearl unfolded the paper, scanning the legal language that made her an equal partner in everything. "Jesse, this is more than we discussed. The Triple T was built by your family, and now you're my family," he said simply. "What's mine is yours, Pearl. I meant every word of our vows." She searched his face, still adjusting to the reality that this man, this good, honorable man, was now her husband. As did I. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Pearl found herself experiencing a moment of shyness as she realized the implications of the night ahead. Jesse, sensitive to her hesitation, approached her with gentle understanding. "Pearl," he said softly, "I want you to know that nothing needs to happen tonight that you're not ready for. Our marriage is real in every way that matters to me, regardless." His consideration only deepened her feelings for him. "Jesse Townsend," she replied, finding courage in the love she saw reflected in his eyes. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of you, of us." The night that followed was a revelation for Pearl, tender, passionate, and healing. In Jesse's arms, she found not just physical pleasure, but a profound emotional connection that banished the loneliness she'd carried for so long. As dawn broke, Pearl lay awake beside her sleeping husband, watching the play of early light across his features. She marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the space of a few days. The woman who had once believed love was a dangerous luxury now found herself treasuring it as her greatest strength. Their peaceful morning was interrupted by the arrival of Hank, Jesse's foreman, with urgent news. Finch's men had been spotted near the Hayes property, apparently searching for something. "We need to ride out there," Jesse said, quickly dressing. "Whatever they're looking for can't be good for our case." Pearl agreed, and within half an hour, they were galloping toward her family's ranch, accompanied by several Triple T hands. As they crested the hill overlooking the property, they spotted 3 of Finch's men digging near the old well behind the house. "What do you think they're looking for?" Pearl asked as they watched from a distance. "I'm not sure," Jesse replied, "but I intend to find out." They approached cautiously, the Triple T men spreading out to prevent escape. When Finch's diggers spotted them, they reached for their guns, but found themselves outnumbered. "Seems you boys are trespassing," Jesse called out, his own weapon drawn but pointed skyward. "Care to explain what you're doing on my property?" Curtis, supervising the digging, spat on the ground. "Just retrieving something that belongs to Mr. Finch. Something Hayes promised him before you interfered." "My father promised Finch nothing," Pearl declared, dismounting to inspect the disturbed earth. A wooden box lay partially exposed in the dirt. "What is this?" Curtis smirked. "Proof that this land rightfully belongs to Mr. Finch. Hayes signed over mineral rights years ago in exchange for loans to keep this sorry excuse for a ranch afloat." Pearl's blood ran cold as she opened the box. Inside lay documents bearing what appeared to be her father's signature, granting Harlan Finch exclusive mineral rights to the Hayes property. "This can't be real," she insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. Her father had been desperate at times, taking loans from questionable sources to maintain the ranch. "Oh, it's real," Curtis assured her. "And once the judge sees it, your marriage won't matter one bit. Finch will control everything under this land, including the water." Jesse examined the documents carefully. "These are dated 3 years ago. If they're legitimate, why didn't Finch enforce them sooner?" "Hayes begged for time. Said he'd sell to Finch when he was ready to leave. But then he double-crossed us, selling to you instead." Curtis's eyes narrowed. Mr. Finch doesn't take kindly to being cheated. Pearl's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with what she knew of her father. He'd been secretive about their finances, especially in recent years, but would he have hidden something this significant? "We'll let the court decide if these papers are legitimate," Jesse declared, taking possession of the box. "In the meantime, get off my land." After Finch's men departed, Pearl and Jesse examined the documents more closely. "The signature looks like my father's," Pearl admitted, "but something feels wrong. He was stubborn and proud, but he wasn't dishonest. He would have told me if he'd made such an agreement." "We need to bring these to a lawyer before the hearing," Jesse decided. "There might be something here we're missing." They rode immediately to town, seeking out Judge Wilson's clerk, a former lawyer named Edwards who had a reputation for spotting fraudulent documents. After examining the papers carefully, Edwards confirmed their suspicions. "This is clever work," he admitted, "but there are inconsistencies. The paper is too new for a document supposedly signed 3 years ago, and the ink hasn't aged properly. Most telling, though, is the notary stamp, Philip Henderson's signature, but he didn't become a notary until last year." Relief washed over Pearl. "So they're forgeries." Absolutely, Edwards confirmed. But convincing ones. Finch must have access to examples of your father's signature. He would have had opportunities, Pearl acknowledged. My father sold cattle to him occasionally. Jesse's expression hardened. This is fraud. With this evidence, we can not only defend our claim, but potentially bring charges against Finch. It won't be easy, Edwards cautioned. Finch has influence with Judge Wilson. But these forgeries are sloppy enough that even Wilson can't ignore them without risking his reputation. Armed with this knowledge, Pearl and Jesse returned to the Triple T to prepare for the hearing. That evening, as they sat before the fire in their shared bedroom, Pearl voiced the question that had been troubling her. What if my father did make some kind of deal with Finch? Not the mineral rights, perhaps, but something else we don't know about. Jesse considered this. Would it change how you feel about defending the land? No, Pearl said firmly. This was my mother's home too. Her family settled here before Colorado was even a territory. Whatever agreements my father may have made, he had no right to bargain away her legacy or mine. Jesse took her hand, his thumb tracing the pearl ring on her finger. Then we fight, together, regardless of what tomorrow brings. The court hearing the following day drew nearly the entire community. Judge Wilson, a stern man with political ambitions, presided with obvious impatience as both sides presented their cases. Finch's lawyer, a slick man from Denver, argued that Samuel Hayes had verbally agreed to sell to Finch before mysteriously changing his mind and selling to Jesse instead. He presented the mineral rights documents as proof of a prior business relationship, conveniently omitting their fraudulent nature. When it was their turn, Jesse's lawyer presented the bill of sale, properly executed and witnessed, transferring the Hayes Ranch to Jesse Townsend. He then called Pearl to testify about her father's intentions. Miss Hayes, pardon me, Mrs. Townsend. Judge Wilson corrected himself. Was your father of sound mind when he sold the ranch to Mr. Townsend? He was, Your Honor, Pearl replied confidently. And did he ever mention any prior agreement with Mr. Finch regarding the sale of the property? Never, Your Honor. My father disliked Mr. Finch intensely and would not have done business with him if any alternative existed. Finch, seated at the plaintiff's table, scowled at this characterization. He was a heavy-set man with expensive taste in clothing and a reputation for ruthlessness in business dealings. The turning point came when Edwards was called to testify about the forged documents. His methodical explanation of the inconsistencies left little room for doubt, even for a judge inclined to favor Finch. Furthermore, Edwards concluded, I believe these forgeries constitute an attempt to defraud the court, which is a serious criminal offense. Judge Wilson's expression darkened as he examined the documents himself. Even with his political connections to Finch, he couldn't ignore such blatant evidence of fraud without compromising his own position. This court finds in favor of the defendants, Wilson declared finally. The Hayes Ranch was legally sold to Jesse Townsend, and subsequently joined with the Triple T Ranch through his marriage to Pearl Hayes Townsend. All claims by Harlan Finch are dismissed. He paused, glaring at Finch. Furthermore, I am referring these forged documents to the district attorney for investigation. A murmur ran through the courthouse as Finch stormed out, followed by his lawyer and men. The community members who had gathered to watch pressed forward to congratulate Jesse and Pearl, their victory representing a rare check on Finch's growing power. This isn't over, Sheriff Taylor warned as they left the courthouse. Finch isn't a man who accepts defeat gracefully. We'll be vigilant, Jesse assured him. But today, at least, justice prevailed. As they rode home to the Triple T, Pearl felt a profound sense of closure. The legal battle had been won, her family's legacy secured. Yet she knew Sheriff Taylor was right. Finch wasn't likely to simply accept the court's decision. What do you think he'll do next? She asked Jesse as they neared home. Something less direct than forgery or intimidation, Jesse replied thoughtfully. He's too exposed now. My guess is he'll try to isolate us, perhaps pressure the cattle buyers or the bank. Pearl nodded, already thinking of countermeasures. We should diversify. The Hayes water rights give us leverage with neighboring ranches. We could form alliances, strength in numbers. Jesse smiled at her. You're thinking like a rancher's wife already. I've been a rancher all my life, Pearl reminded him. Just not always a successful one. That's about to change, Jesse promised. Together, We'll build something neither of our families could have accomplished alone. As they rode through the gates of what was now truly their shared ranch, Pearl believed him. For the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to look toward the future with hope, not just for survival, but for prosperity and happiness. Spring came to Colorado in a riot of wildflowers and new calves. 6 months of marriage had transformed Pearl's life in ways she could never have imagined. The Hayes barn had been rebuilt, stronger than before, and the combined herds of the Hayes and Triple T ranches were thriving under joint management. Most surprising to Pearl was the ease with which she and Jesse had melded their lives together. The partnership that had begun as a strategic alliance against Finch had blossomed into a deep and abiding love, strengthened through shared work and purpose. They had weathered Finch's continued attempts to undermine them, pressure on local merchants, rumors spread to cattle buyers, even an attempt to call in the Triple T's bank loans early. But each challenge had been met and overcome, often with help from community members who had grown tired of Finch's monopolistic practices. On this particular morning, Pearl stood on the porch of their home, the Triple T main house, where they had chosen to live while maintaining the Hayes house for ranch hands, watching Jesse work with a young colt in the corral. His patience with the nervous animal reminded her of his patience with her in those early days, when she had been so afraid to trust, to love. "Mrs. Townsend?" Pearl turned to find Mrs. Donnelly at the door, holding a letter. "This just arrived from California. Special delivery." Pearl's heart quickened as she recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope. Since leaving Colorado, Samuel Hayes had written only once, a brief note acknowledging her marriage to Jesse without offering congratulations or explanation for his own actions. She opened the letter with trembling fingers, scanning the contents quickly before reading more carefully. "My God," she whispered, sinking into a porch chair. "Bad news?" Mrs. Donnelly asked worriedly. "I'm not sure," Pearl replied honestly. "Would you ask Jesse to come up to the house, please?" When Jesse arrived, still dusting his hands from the corral, Pearl handed him the letter wordlessly. "My dearest daughter," Jesse read aloud. "I write to make a confession long overdue. The burden of my secrets has become too heavy to bear, especially as I face the possibility of my own mortality." Jesse looked up sharply. "Is he ill?" "Keep reading," Pearl urged. "You must have wondered why I was so determined to leave Colorado, why I sold our ranch so hastily. The truth is that I did indeed make a deal with Harlan Finch, not for mineral rights, but for my freedom. Years ago, when drought threatened to destroy everything, I borrowed money from him. The terms were predatory, designed to eventually force me to surrender the ranch. When I could not repay, Finch offered an alternative, evidence that would implicate him in a stagecoach robbery that left 2 men dead. He had been careful to keep his hands clean, using hired men, but I discovered his involvement. Rather than use this information, I held it as insurance, ensuring he would not press his advantage too far. As the years passed, however, Finch's power grew, and I feared my knowledge made us targets. When he began pressing for the water rights more aggressively, I knew I had to act. I sold to Jesse Townsend not just because he offered fair terms, but because I believed he could protect you and the land better than I ever could. I also believed he held feelings for you that might lead to a more permanent alliance. I fled to California not out of cowardice, but to draw Finch's attention away from you. I have sent copies of my evidence to the territorial governor and the federal marshal, along with this confession. By the time you read this, Finch may already be facing justice for crimes far more serious than fraud. I do not expect your forgiveness, Pearl. I have been a poor father since your mother's death, allowing bitterness to cloud my judgment and distance me from the one person who mattered most. Know that I am proud of the woman you have become, and if reports reaching California are accurate, proud of the life you and Jesse are building together. With deepest regret and enduring love, your father. Jesse lowered the letter, meeting Pearl's gaze. This changes everything we thought we knew about him. He was protecting me, Pearl said, still processing this revelation. All those years I thought he was simply bitter and closed off. He made mistakes, Jesse acknowledged, but this letter suggests his heart was in the right place. Pearl nodded slowly. I wonder if the authorities have acted on his evidence yet. Her question was answered the very next day when Sheriff Taylor rode out to inform them that Harlan Finch had been arrested by federal marshals on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, robbery, and fraud. Your father's evidence was apparently quite detailed, the sheriff explained. Names, dates, financial records showing payments to the men who actually committed the robbery. Finch won't wiggle out of this one. Will my father need to testify? Pearl asked, concerned for his safety. Most likely, but the marshals will ensure his protection. Sheriff Taylor hesitated. There's something else you should know. Curtis and several of Finch's other men have fled the territory. There's concern they might seek revenge against those they blame for Finch's downfall. Jesse's arm tightened around Pearl's shoulders. We'll take precautions. After the sheriff departed, they implemented immediate security measures. Ranch hands patrolling in shifts, firearms kept loaded and accessible, and no one riding out alone. Pearl found the return to vigilance exhausting but necessary. I wish we could simply enjoy the peace we've earned, she confessed to Jesse one evening as they prepared for bed. We will, he promised. Once Curtis and the others are captured, or at least driven far from Colorado. And my father? Should I write to him? Ask him to come home? Jesse considered this. That's entirely your decision, Pearl. But I think he would welcome the invitation, when you're ready to extend it. Pearl nodded, still reconciling the father she thought she knew with the man revealed in his letter. I need time. Time, however, was a luxury they couldn't count on. 3 days later, as Pearl was hanging laundry in the yard, she spotted riders approaching from the south, 4 men, moving fast, with bandanas covering their faces. She dropped the laundry and ran for the house, calling out a warning. Jesse emerged immediately, rifle in hand, directing ranch hands to defensive positions as Mrs. Donnelly ushered Pearl inside. Stay away from the windows, the housekeeper instructed, retrieving a shotgun from the kitchen pantry with surprising familiarity. This isn't my first raid. Pearl grabbed her own rifle from the gun cabinet, checking that it was loaded. I'm not hiding while Jesse faces danger. Before Mrs. Donnelly could object, gunfire erupted outside. Pearl moved to a window position that offered both cover and a view of the yard. She could see Jesse and 3 ranch hands exchanging fire with the attackers, who had taken position behind the water trough and corral fence. That's Curtis, Pearl said, recognizing the leader despite his mask. And those are Finch's men. They've come for revenge, Mrs. Donnelly stated grimly. Question is, against whom? Jesse for marrying you and securing the water rights? Or you, because of your father's evidence? Does it matter? They're here to kill us either way. Pearl watched as Jesse coordinated with his men, their disciplined return fire keeping the attackers pinned down. But she could see they were attempting to work their way around to the back of the house, where the defensive line was thinner. They're trying to flank us, she told Mrs. Donnelly. We need to watch the rear. The 2 women moved to the back of the house, just as one of Finch's men attempted to approach through the kitchen garden. Without hesitation, Pearl raised her rifle and fired, striking the man in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry, scrambling for cover. Good shot, Mrs. Donnelly approved. The firefight continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Pearl and Mrs. Donnelly held the rear of the house, while Jesse and the ranch hands defended the front and sides. The attackers, finding themselves unable to advance, began to pull back toward their horses. They're retreating, Pearl called out, relief flooding her. Her relief was short-lived. As Curtis mounted his horse, he turned and fired one last shot, not at the defenders, but at the barn. Pearl watched in horror as flames erupted from a hay bale just inside the door. He had used an incendiary round, designed to start fires. The barn, she shouted, already moving toward the door. They've set it on fire. Jesse and his men redirected their attention to the spreading flames, momentarily giving the attackers the opening they needed to escape. Pearl ran toward the barn, where panicked horses were beginning to kick at their stalls. Get the horses out, Jesse ordered as men rushed to form a water line from the well to the barn. Pearl and 2 ranch hands entered the smoky structure, working quickly to release the terrified animals. The fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the dry hay and licking at the wooden beams overhead. As Pearl led the last mare out, a burning beam crashed down behind her, momentarily cutting off her exit. She heard Jesse calling her name, his voice frantic. I'm here, she called back, searching for an alternate path through the thickening smoke. Suddenly, Jesse appeared through the haze, a wet bandana over his face. "This way," he shouted, reaching for her hand. Together they navigated through the burning barn, emerging into fresh air just as another section of the roof collapsed. They joined the water line, working alongside the ranch hands to control the blaze, but it was clear the structure couldn't be saved. "Focus on keeping it from spreading to the house," Jesse directed, his face streaked with soot and sweat. After an exhausting battle, they managed to contain the fire to the barn alone. By nightfall, only smoldering ruins remained where the structure had stood. Pearl, exhausted and smoke-stained, sat on the porch steps beside Jesse as Mrs. Donnelly brought them cool water and food. None of their people had been seriously injured, though two had suffered minor burns, and all the horses had been saved. "They'll be back," Jesse said quietly, voicing what they all feared. Pearl nodded, the day's events crystallizing a decision in her mind. "We need to write to my father, not just to invite him home, but to ask for his help. He knows more about Finch and his operation than anyone." "Are you sure?" Jesse asked, studying her face. "You said you needed time." "Time is a luxury we no longer have," Pearl replied, echoing his earlier sentiment. "Besides, I've realized something today. Life is too short and too precious to waste on old grievances. My father acted out of love, however misguided his methods. I want to rebuild that relationship before it's too late." Jesse smiled, pride evident in his eyes despite his exhaustion. "You continue to amaze me, Pearl Townsend." "As you do me, Jesse Townsend," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We'll get through this together, as we have everything else." The letter was dispatched the following morning by special courier, along with a report to the federal marshals about the attack. 2 weeks of tense vigilance followed, during which Pearl and Jesse slept in shifts, always alert for signs of Curtis's return. Their precautions proved unnecessary. Word reached them through Sheriff Taylor that federal marshals had tracked Curtis and his men to a hideout near the territorial border, resulting in a shootout that left Curtis dead and the others in custody. "It's over," the sheriff assured them. "Finch's operation has been dismantled completely. His assets seized, his men captured or killed. You can breathe easy now." The relief was palpable throughout the ranch. That evening, for the first time in weeks, Pearl and Jesse sat on their porch without weapons close at hand, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "What shall we build first?" Jesse asked, gesturing toward the burned barn site. "Another barn? Or perhaps something new?" Pearl considered the question. "Something new, I think. A fresh start." She turned to him with a smile. "Perhaps a larger house? The Triple T is comfortable, but if our family grows..." Jesse's eyes widened. "Pearl, are you saying?" She nodded, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "I suspected for a few weeks, but confirmed it with Doc Wilson yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Jesse, next spring." The joy that illuminated Jesse's face was like nothing Pearl had ever seen. He gathered her into his arms, laughing and crying all at once. "A baby. Our future," Pearl agreed, her own eyes shining. "Built on everything we've fought for together." As they held each other in the gathering dusk, Pearl reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From her father's hasty departure to her reluctant partnership with Jesse, from their strategic marriage to the deep and abiding love they now shared. Each step had been necessary to bring them here. The frontier had indeed proven harsh and unforgiving, but it had also forged something beautiful: a family, a home, a love strong enough to withstand whatever challenges still lay ahead. And when Samuel Hayes returned 3 months later, gaunt but determined to make amends, Pearl welcomed him with open arms, not just as her father, but as the grandfather of the child growing within her. The past was forgiven, if not forgotten, and together they looked toward a future full of promise. On a warm spring morning the following year, as wildflowers once again carpeted the meadows, Pearl gave birth to a daughter they named Hope, a fitting tribute to the emotion that had sustained them through their darkest hours. As Jesse held his newborn child, with Pearl watching from the bed and Samuel standing proudly nearby, the circle felt complete. "She's perfect," Jesse whispered, awe in his voice. "She is," Pearl agreed. "And she's home, where she belongs." "Where you belong," Jesse said, echoing the words he'd spoken that fateful day when her father had left. "You've always belonged with me, Pearl Hayes Townsend." from the very beginning. And as the Colorado sun streamed through the window, illuminating the family they had built from adversity and love, Pearl knew it was true. This was where she belonged, not just on this land, but with this man, in this life they had created together. The frontier had tried to teach her that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Pearl had learned a different lesson. Love wasn't a luxury at all, but the very foundation upon which everything of value was built. It was the strength that had allowed her to stay when her father left, the courage that had helped her open her heart when fear counseled otherwise, and the wisdom that now guided her as a wife and mother. Love, Pearl realized, was the greatest frontier of all, vast, sometimes daunting, but always, always worth exploring.